Well, good afternoon. Welcome back post-lunch. My name is Madeline Brosen, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. And it's my honor and privilege to welcome us back into the conversation and get more into the weeds about accessibility. And our second panel this afternoon is titled Curbing Inaccessibility, Fixing LA's Streets and Sidewalks, and I think with an emphasis on the sidewalk part of things. So first I want to welcome up all of the panelists for this session. And as they are coming up, I'm going to go ahead and introduce who you're going to be hearing from. So first, we're going to hear from Candace Cable. Candace is a 9-time Paralympian and consultant. She's going to be joined by Natalie Sparrow. Natalie is the ADA coordinator within the Department of Public Works in the city of Los Angeles. We're going to get the opportunity to actually kind of break out of hearing about all LA from LA and have kind of one of our speakers, Jill Locantore, who's the executive director of the Denver Streets Partnership, to kind of get some inspiration about other places. And then in response to the comments, we're going to hear from Jessica Meaney, who's the executive director of Investing in Place. So with that, I just kind of going to go right into it. Just kind of for the order of things, Candace, we're going to give it to you first to offer some comments, and share a video, and then we're going to kind of go down the line. So let's just see. Is that microphone working?
Is it working?
Perfect. All right.
Oh, okay. And please tell me, raise your hand if I tuck away and you can't hear me very well. Okay. Because I'll look down at my notes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really energized to be here because there's so much opportunity in the room, right? To do things differently, to try something new and maybe hear something that you haven't heard before. I live in downtown LA. I live in the South Park area, and I travel the sidewalks all the time. And it's a little daunting to get around downtown. And I live downtown because I want it to be easy. I don't want to have to drive as much. There's a lot of places that I can go to be able to get the things I need to get. But when I'm on the sidewalks, and as a person who uses a wheelchair, I have to be vigilant constantly because I never know if there's going to be a crack or a hole or a tree root that's uplifted things that might knock me out of my wheelchair. And I have friends that have been knocked out of their wheelchairs before from the sidewalks. And so one of the things I really love to do is to teach about the experience of disability. And so having this opportunity here is really great because I can give you an idea of what my experience is like. And people oftentimes will do these walk move audits, but they won't have someone who uses mobility equipment, so you won't get that perspective. And for me, when I think about access, it has a lot of meanings. You know, it could be access on the roads, it could be access to equipment, it could be access to information. So it's been kind of hijacked. And when we say, you know, the inaccessibility or accessibility, but for us here in Los Angeles, our sidewalks are going to be a major thoroughfare during the games. And we are having also the Paralympic Games here. I hear a lot of people talk about the Olympics are coming, and then I hear Olympics and Paralympics every once in a while. But if we really focus on the Paralympics coming here, we're going to focus on disability because it's about disability, you know, because all the people that compete in the Paralympic Games have disabilities. And Paralympians like to go around the town when they're in a place. They want to go see things. So they're going to hit the road. And we really need to have our sidewalks and our paths of travel ready for everyone. And they're not. They're really not. You know, in 1974, the last ugly law was put to sleep. Now, does anybody in here know what the ugly laws were? I see someone nodding over there. It was people like me weren't allowed to be out on the street or on the sidewalks because we were disfigured in sense. And so my spinal cord injury was in 1975, and I started using a wheelchair. So 1 year after the ugly laws, which means that before that, disabled people were hidden from sight. And we weren't a part of the conversation. It's why we're so behind, really. It really is why we're behind. And what we need now is to bring more and more people with disabilities. And Juan said that so well earlier about people with mobility disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities, people who are blind, people who are deaf, into the conversations and a part of everything from start to finish, because that will show us where we really need to go. There's going to be 15,000 Paralympians hitting the streets. Now, the Olympians are going to come and they're going to be ambulatory, pretty much all of them. And so it's not going to be different. That's going to happen there. But for the Paralympians, it's going to be a unique experience that has to happen in a really great way so that they can go away and send that postcard home saying, you want to go to LA, you want to visit LA. So one of the things that I also want to bring up before we show our little video here is that when I hear people say that they're ADA compliant, it tells me they're just checking a box. Because you may not know this, but the ADA is the lowest bar. It's the absolute, thank you for shaking your head, I love that. It's the lowest bar. And we don't want the lowest bar. We want to take it higher and higher and higher. And I feel, and it's something that this panel has talked about in our prep, was that the education of what needs to happen and what is happening right now and needs to be changed is essential, as is education about the Paralympics, as is education about disabled people. But what is happening here in the city and the way it's set up, you're going to learn today that it's set up in a way to really confuse things, and then how we can make it better. So we have a video that Natalie and I put together to show my experience on the sidewalks. This is 4th and Main, where you'll see I'm wheeling. I think, will I see it on the back one too? Oh, okay, thank you. And Natalie's, well, this is the first part, is the uneven sidewalk. So as I'm rolling, it's a little too steep. I can't get over it. And so I have to figure out a way to get around it, or I would have had to turn around and go back. And that little side hill there, I could fall over pretty easily, right? So as I'm rolling along, here we're at 4th and Main. There's no curb ramp. And there's no curb ramp on that side either. And what I have to do now is I have to roll down to a driveway. And Natalie will be following me as I'm rolling to a driveway. And I'll tell you, in 1975, when I first started using a wheelchair, this is something I had to do all the time, because the Americans with Disabilities Act, I mean, the Architectural Barriers Act was 1968, but those were federal buildings, right? Like that was a federal thing. But in 1973, we had the Rehabilitation Act, which said that when someone received federal funds, they needed to make things accessible. Not until 1990, we had the ADA, which said that we needed to make things accessible for everyone, no matter what the funding is. And so now I have to go out into the street, and you see this car go by really fast. So it's always super sketchy. I'm always nervous when I'm wheeling around, but I love wheeling around my city. I absolutely love Los Angeles so much. And I know we have massive opportunity to be able to really make this city a place where people can move around easily, because the sidewalks are going to be a thread, a real thread for us. And so now I'm going to cross the street. And then what we're going to show you in the video next is how the curb ramps send someone out into the middle of the street. They don't actually have the opportunity first to get in the crosswalk and go straight across. So I have to go out and around to be able to hit that curb ramp straight, because if I don't hit it straight, I'm going to fall out of my wheelchair. Here is an example on the other side of the street of a proper curb ramp, how it should be done. I have some friends that are blind. I was like, you guys are trying to kill me. You know, you're sending me out to the middle of the street all the time. I don't know where I am when I'm in LA. So I think we have a massive opportunity but we need the money, right? We need the money to be able to change these curb ramps so that they're done properly, because we're going to need that when we have all of these people coming to this city, but also when people are living here and they can enjoy it safely. So thank you, and I want to pass it off to Natalie.
Candace, thank you so much for like prepping that and taking us on that tour that just made all these very technical things that you like see in plans like very real, right? Like that's kind of, I think, what the power of having people with disabilities in our audits, but also just like seeing these little things. It's like a very powerful point. So I'm going to turn to Natalie Sparrow, who's just going to kind of help round a little bit kind of in the city of LA to help kind of explain of who's responsible for the sidewalk infrastructure, and then kind of who needs to be educated in terms of like the importance, the highlight of that, and kind of how as a city to respond to the issues that we have on our streets.
Thank you. Is it working? Can you hear me? No.
Yeah. You want this one?
Maybe. There we go. Great. How about now? Yep. Excellent. So thank you, Candace. Up. Okay.
Swap.
I'll give you that one back. Share it.
Oh, you put it where you need it.
Great. Thank you, Candace. You know, I really wanted to take that opportunity to film with you because I think it provides a really wonderful foundation for what those of us in the room are working towards, which is an accessible and enjoyable, equitable experience for those who are coming to visit the city for the games, but then also for those of us who live and work here and are trying to just live our daily lives. So I think that's really impactful. But before we can move on to how do we fix it, right? How do we get better? How do we remove those sidewalk barriers? How do we start constructing curb ramps that actually facilitate a safe experience? We have to understand where we've been and where we are currently. And it's a little bit of a confusing situation. Oftentimes I hear people ask, you know, well, who's actually responsible for maintaining the sidewalks, right? And if you ask 10 people, you would probably get 10 different answers. And so I wanted to take a minute to level set and show you a fairly boring but very informative timeline so that we can move forward, right? And Candace, you've mentioned a couple of these dates already, but when it comes to sidewalks and when it comes to the responsibility for sidewalk repair and maintenance, we have a couple of different laws at the federal, state, and local level, which create kind of a soup of responsibilities where folks are pointing fingers back and forth at each other, which creates an environment which stagnates change. So we're going to start in 1941 with the California Streets and Highways Code. So state law, which is still on the books, which indicates that 100% of the sidewalk maintenance is on the property owner. And what the law actually states is that the property owner shall maintain, so shall, required, the sidewalk condition so that it doesn't endanger any person traveling and it doesn't interfere with traveling. So it is a requirement by the state for the property owner to maintain. And in here, we also have some civil rights laws. Candace mentioned 1973 was the Rehab Act, which indicates that the city, because it was a recipient of federal funds, was obligated to ensure that pedestrians have equal access to sidewalks and the program or the thoroughfare and network that are our pedestrian facilities, our crosswalks, our sidewalks, and our curb ramps. So here already, between 1941 and 73, we already have a conflict in a way, right? We have state law, which says the property owner shall maintain, and yet we have this federal civil rights law, which makes the city responsible for ensuring that these facilities are maintained. As we move on, in 1974, so it was the same date as the last ugly law, which I didn't realize that overlap, not that long ago, right? About 50 years ago, there was a city in ordinance where the city took on sidewalk repair only if it was due to tree root damage. So that would, let's just say, an estimate of 10% of the damage in the city. We're just estimating that that's about how much would have been caused by trees, would have been on the city to repair. Otherwise, the remainder was still on the property owner. The city has a network of about 9,000 miles of sidewalks. So even that 10% is fairly considerable. At about that time, there was grant funding available, which is what motivated the city to go from that 41 law of having no responsibility to taking on a portion of it. But shortly thereafter, 1974, that grant funding ran out. So the city had taken on this new responsibility, and yet it now didn't have the funds to address that, even just that 10%. Then in 1990, we have another civil rights law that came into effect, the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act. And this was landmark because it removed the requirement for federal funding. So the Civil Rights Act, the Rehab Act, indicated that the city must provide access because it was in receipt of federal funds. In 1990, it removed that federal funding requirement, and it just said, because you are a city government, you are obligated to ensure that folks have equal access, equal and independent access to enjoy these facilities in the same way as others. And then in 2006 was the Willits lawsuit. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time to talk about the sidewalk repair program and the Willits settlement. The Willits lawsuit was filed based on allegations that the city was not meeting its obligations under the ADA. And so what are those? The Americans with Disabilities Act requires a couple of specific things. One of the main things is a self-evaluation and transition plan. And so I know that many of you in the room are talking about, and maybe Jessica will speak to this, the need to inventory what we have out in our public right-of-way now. If we want to make improvements to the condition of our city's transportation infrastructure, the first thing in doing that is knowing what we've got. The ADA actually requires us to know what we've got. So that's one of the first things, is to inventory and assess, to understand what facilities you have and what are the barriers in those facilities for people with disabilities. And then we're obligated to make a plan to address those. And so really the ADA, just with that one requirement, provides those of us who are trying to make change with a really core fundamental piece of asset management, right? Knowing what you have, creating a plan to fix it. And the other thing that the ADA requires is also the ability for folks with disabilities to submit requests to have barriers removed. And the idea is that even if you have that plan, that understanding of how you're going to get to an accessible city, you may not be doing it quick enough or in the order in which people need it to be done. And so there's a requirement for folks to be able to ask for you to do it faster or to reprioritize items. And so you'll see both of those things kind of borne out in the rest of this timeline. And when the Willits lawsuit was filed in 2006, it was because the city had failed to maintain its pedestrian facilities over the course, the last 50, 60 years. And so it was filed in 2006, and in 2015, the settlement was agreed to, and it was a landmark obligation, a landmark commitment really from the city to spend over $1.4 billion over 30 years to remediate barriers for people with disabilities in the public right-of-way. And the primary sub-program of that agreement is called the Access Request Program. It's where folks with disabilities can make requests and have those barriers removed as urgently as the city is able to address them. Currently, I want to regale you with some numbers. So I did mention that the city has about 9,000 miles of sidewalks. The Sidewalk Repair Program, which is the program that implements the Willits Settlement Agreement, has remediated about 15 miles of sidewalk a year. and about 50 curb ramps a year. And we receive about 6,500 access requests over the course of the settlement so far, and about 1,000 a year. So, and we are completing approximately 300 a year. So we receive about 1,000, we complete about 300 a year. And so the numbers are concerning, right? We're certainly making progress, and the Willett settlement is certainly useful. It's a landmark commitment, like I said, but it's just one piece of the larger puzzle that's necessary for the city to actually improve and maintain the condition of our public right-of-way facilities. So, so moving on in our timeline, in 2017, the city amended its sidewalk repair ordinance. So it took that 1974 ordinance and modified it, and basically indicated that the city would first repair the sidewalk and then turn over maintenance to the property owner. So this is what's called fix and release. So back in 74, it said the property owner was going to maintain, back in 74, it said the city takes on the obligation. In 2017, it indicated that the city would maintain and then turn it over to the property owner. So if you've ever inquired with the city and you heard somebody respond to you and say, well, the property owner's responsible, that's true, but only after the city first fixes it. So the city is obligated to fix the sidewalk, it issues a certificate of compliance, and then the property owner is obligated to maintain it in that condition. The challenge with this is that since 2017, the city has only issued about 1% of the COCs, or certificates of compliance, necessary to hand over citywide maintenance to the property owner. So we've made just very little bit of progress in that effort. And so what you'll see is that we have fingers pointing back and forth, right? We've got the state saying one thing, we've got the city saying another, we have the federal civil rights laws indicating something else. And then below all of that, we have a city who hasn't established a program to create those fixes and maintain the sidewalk. So we have both of those issues of who's responsible, and then the lack of an established program to actually go out and maintain these facilities. And that's what came to light in 2021. The controller at the time did a robust investigation of the city's sidewalk repair programs. So all the folks in the city doing work on the sidewalks, and reported out basically what I've shared with you today, right? That we do have a really a wonderful settlement agreement that has been extremely useful in forwarding the goals of the disabled community, but it's just one piece in what has to be a larger puzzle if the city's going to make effective change in time for the games and to create a really lasting legacy for Angelenos. We need to look beyond that one program to establish a more proactive way of looking at the infrastructure we have and planning for how we're going to improve and maintain it over time. And that's where in 2024, we have Mayor Bass who saw that issue and issued Executive Directive number 9, which lays out the mandate for the city to create that proactive approach to managing its pedestrian facilities like an asset, like something that we rely on, like a roadway or a rail facility, understanding number 1, what we have, and how are we going to improve it over time and keep it in usable condition. And so that's why we are where we are.
Perfect. And I think we'll hear from Jessica a little bit of kind of setting up, launching off from this 2024. But thanks. That was really helpful, kind of understanding, how it is that we've dug ourselves this giant hole. And think to Candace's point, just how far behind all cities were really in the beginning, and then kind of where we are now. So we're going to pause on our LA story a little bit and head over to Denver. And I want to invite Jill to get up and give a presentation about how they're doing things there. Let's see if I can, this one.
I'm just going to hit start.
That's so good.
Start. Whoops.
She's got a solution for us. We're looking to Denver to the solution. So I've set up the issue, and now she's going to share with us a way to solve it.
Thank you. Before I jump into Denver's story, I want to share my California credentials. I did actually get my undergraduate degree from Pomona College here in Claremont. Go Sage Hens. So Los Angeles and Southern California really does have a special place in my heart, and I'm going to give away how old I am. I was here in 1994 when the Northridge earthquake happened, and it caused several sections of I'm now used to calling it I-10, but it's the 10 to collapse. And that was repaired and up and running, open to the public again within 3 months. So there is evidence in your own history that if you've decided something is important, you can get it done. And so just imagine what you could do in 3 years if you think it is important. So today I am the executive director of the Denver Streets Partnership. We are a grassroots advocacy organization focused on reducing Denver's unsustainable dependence on cars and prioritizing people in the design of our transportation system and our communities more generally. Our vision is a more equitable and vibrant Denver where everybody can thrive and get to their daily destinations without car ownership being a necessary prerequisite to that. And just like in 1941, the state law here in California, Denver for many, many decades had a policy of requiring private property owners to build the sidewalks and to maintain them. And if you think about this, it's kind of the equivalent of saying you as a property owner are responsible for filling the potholes and repaving the streets and fixing the water main if it breaks in front of your house. It turns out that's a really terrible way to build a complete, well-maintained, functional network that actually serves a public purpose. And this is truly a citywide problem in Denver. 40% of our streets either have no sidewalk at all or a substandard sidewalk, by which I mean it's too skinny to meet ADA standards, too skinny for two people to walk side by side, for a parent with a stroller. In Denver, we call them rollover curbs, but some people refer to them as Hollywood sidewalks. Thank you for introducing that idea to the world. They're about 18 inches wide, and they're basically a curb, a glorified curb that's easy to drive over in your car. That is why they were invented. And it's a social justice issue too. Our lower income neighborhoods, nearly half of those streets have missing or substandard sidewalks. And these are exactly the neighborhoods where fewer people own a car and they truly depend on walking to get to transit or other daily destinations. And surprise, that's where we have the highest pedestrian fatality rates as well. So we've been talking about this for a long time in Denver. Back in 2001, we adopted Blueprint Denver. That's our overarching land use and transportation plan. It identified that pedestrians are the primary element of our transportation system. And therefore, we need to prioritize that when we're building and maintaining public infrastructure. In 2004, our city adopted our first pedestrian master plan, which specifically recommended that the city take a more active role in maintaining our sidewalks and actually recommended a specific funding mechanism in order to make that possible. But at the time, our mayor, Wellington Webb, was not supportive of this idea. So as plans do, it got dusty on a shelf somewhere. 10 years later, we were still talking about sidewalks and there was growing public demand. What is the city doing about this? How can I get better sidewalks in my neighborhood, as evidenced by not only opinion pieces, but our own editorial board at the Denver Post said it was time to stop talking about them and making them a priority. So under our previous brand name, Walk Denver became the Denver Streets Partnership. We launched the Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign in 2015. And we were basically just asking the city to implement its own plan recommendations, to assume responsibility for building and maintaining the sidewalks, and to establish a dedicated funding source to make that possible. We gathered petition signatures, support letters from allied organizations, and we got some little bitty baby wins. The city went from spending $0 per year on sidewalk construction to spending about $2 to $3 million building sidewalks in front of public property, so in front of parks and schools and things like that. In 2017, the voters approved a general obligation bond that included nearly $50 million for sidewalks, particularly in low-income neighborhoods. And the city started a new proactive neighborhood inspection and repair program. So instead of just waiting for people to complain about broken sidewalks and basically snitch on their neighbor saying it's their job to fix the sidewalk, the city started going out proactively inspecting the sidewalk and working with the property owner to get them to make that repair. In that same time frame, we updated our pedestrian master plan, did an inventory to find out where the sidewalks were missing, where they were substandard, estimated what it would cost to build out the sidewalk network, surprise, $1 billion, and created a prioritization scheme of if we were to build it out, where would we start? Let's start on the high injury network where most of the traffic fatalities happen, high priority transit streets and the like. And we were also able to estimate at our current funding levels, $2 to $3 million per year, how long would it take us to build out that sidewalk network? 400 years was the answer, which was not very acceptable. And our auditor also did an audit of the neighborhood sidewalk repair program and basically confirmed what we've been saying all along, that this whole program was flawed by putting the responsibility on the adjacent private property owner. It was perpetuating the inequities that we were seeing in our city, where wealthy neighborhoods have nice sidewalks and low-income neighborhoods have terrible sidewalks, and recommended yet again by the end of 2021 that the city should review its ordinances and consider changes. So the end of 2021 came and went, and the city still hadn't done anything. So we launched version 2.0 of our Denver Deserves Sidewalks campaign, where we took it directly to the voters. Like California, in Colorado, you can do a citizen-initiated ballot measure where you collect petition signatures, you get enough, it goes on the ballot, and the voters get to decide for themselves. So the Denver Deserves Sidewalks program, again, it was very basic. It's implementing what the city plans already recommended, removing the responsibility for repairs from the adjacent private property owners and placing that on the city. That sounds really boring and bureaucratic, but it's very important because we're now finally treating sidewalks like other basic public infrastructure, like streets, like our storm sewers. We are collectively funding and managing this public infrastructure. And also it funds the construction and repair of that infrastructure through an annual property fee charged to every single property in Denver, except for our airport. If you've ever flown into Denver, you know our airport's basically in Kansas, so nobody walks there. But every other property in the city, government property, private property, pays this annual fee. And it's very important that it has those two changes together. If we had just said it's now the city's responsibility to build and maintain the sidewalks, but we didn't have the funding source, we would have ended up like LA. We would have been sued because we weren't able to fulfill this promise to the voter. And also, it wouldn't have been enough just to throw money at the sidewalk program. We needed the policy change so that we weren't trying to build a sidewalk 150-foot property at a time, but we're actually building it out as a network. So this property fee will generate about $40 million per year, which will enable the construction of a complete network. The ordinance mandates that the city do this within 9 years or as soon thereafter. We realize there's some uncertainty about how we're going to take this project on, but this basically forces the city not just to pay as they go, but they need to bond against those revenues because the full build out cost is something approaching $1 billion. So let's use this dedicated revenue stream to generate the money up front to build out the network quickly. And then that property fee is permanent. So this does provide an ongoing in perpetuity source of funding for sidewalk maintenance. We did not want to create yet another unfunded mandate where we build the sidewalk and then we just let the whole network fall into disrepair. But this will allow the sidewalks to be maintained in good condition forever. Just some quick details on the property fee. in the original ordinance, the property fee was tied to the linear frontage of each property. So the bigger your property is, the more sidewalk you have adjacent to it, the higher the property fee would be. Some property owners did not like that, particularly corner property owners who have a lot of sidewalk adjacent to their property. So after the voters approved the ordinance, City Council amended it, had a lot of debate about what is fair. I can tell you there's 100 different ways to define what fair means when we're talking about using public dollars. But where we ended up was a flat fee of $150 per year for the vast majority of properties in Denver. If your property has more than 230 linear feet of property frontage, there's an additional impact fee based on the size of your property. There's also discounts for low-income properties. The original ordinance was an automatic discount for properties in certain low-income neighborhoods. Now it's an income qualified discount that anybody can take advantage of throughout the city. This money is only for sidewalks. It is for sidewalk construction, sidewalk upgrades to make them ADA compliant, sidewalk repairs, and of course the cost to administer the program. It takes people to make these programs work. It does not include sidewalks on private property if it's internal to the property, and it doesn't include all the other things that we need for a good pedestrian environment: landscaping, street furniture, pedestrian scale lighting. That is all very important. This fund is solely for sidewalks. It is managed by our Department of Transportation, just like they manage repaving the streets. There is public accountability. They have to present a plan to our Citizen Advisory Board and give them annual updates on how the program is going. It reminds the city that they already have lots of plans. Use those plans to prioritize the build out of the network. And we have this weird thing in Denver where we have a lot of flagstone sidewalks that are super important for historical reasons. So it tells the city, please do what you can to preserve those nice flagstone sidewalks. We got about 50 organizations that endorsed this ballot measure, everything from local neighborhood associations up to national organizations like the Nature Conservancy and America Walks. So after 2 decades and then 3 years, we have finally solved the problem. We had to collect a total of about 11,000 valid signatures to get this on the ballot. We did qualify. We didn't have any organized opposition to the campaign. We got a 56% vote yes, which if you consider people are voting to tax themselves about $150 a year, and the majority of people said yes. It only took 2 years for City Council to make some revisions to the voter approved ordinance. So the fee, the program was officially enacted this January. The city started collecting the fee. The repairs are supposed to start any moment now, sometime in May. And then the city's going to be doing a master planning process for building out the missing parts of the network. So we hope that this becomes a shining model for the rest of the city or the rest of the country to look to. Still a lot of unanswered questions. How do you build out thousands of miles of sidewalks in 10 years? But hopefully I can come back in 10 years and tell you how it goes. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jill, for giving us some inspiration. We know a thing or two about self-taxation in Los Angeles, but I think we've, have a missed opportunity to kind of do that at this very local pedestrian level. So I want to turn to Jessica to talk a little bit about kind of reacting to what we heard about the ideas from Denver, expanding on the point kind of where Natalie left off, and just kind of about the experience of our sidewalks in general.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Hello? Hi. Okay, cool. So first off, so excited to finally be on a panel all about sidewalks. It's been a lonely field. I think you're looking at some of the experts, I would say in the city of Los Angeles, there's probably 15 experts, maybe probably less. Laura Messier from USC, if you also want to really learn about how things are working both locally and nationally. When I met Laura, I was like, oh my gosh, somebody's actually digging deep, because what Natalie provided is gold. It has taken me years to understand what the fuck is going on around sidewalks. No, I think I just want to be, the biggest thing I would want you to hear is that I think there's a humongous misunderstanding in city council and people who live in LA that somebody's fixing the sidewalks. They're not. Like, full stop. There is no program. There is a lawsuit. And the city is mandated at minimum to spend $35 million a year since 2016. And at the rate it's going, it's hit like less than 1%. It can take a member of the class action lawsuit 10 years to get an access grant. If you're an able-bodied individual and not a member of that class action, you're not getting that 311 request. Like, absolutely not. And so I think that just starting from a level playing field, that the issues around walkability, walking in your neighborhood, walking to the bus stop, all that stuff has been flat out ignored by the field of transportation, by policymakers, by public works, by all of the above. There's absolutely no reason we're not using transportation dollars to fix our sidewalks. Just so like if we played by LA's existing fix and release, which is so not something I really agree with, but we could be using, we fought really hard. A lot of us in this room fought really hard for Measure M. And we worked really hard to change that so sidewalks were eligible. Voters saw it when they voted. Investing in Place, the nonprofit I work at, we were really lucky. We did polling. We got some good money to do some polling. You know what people really want? Sidewalks fixed in LA. But for some reason, city council, they just don't hear that. I don't know. And when I talk to city council offices, they think, oh, Willits is doing it. Oh, the class action lawsuit is doing it. No, it's not. And the other thing though, like after that kind of grumpiness aside, I love sidewalks. I love going for walks. And I think that like the way I think about them is they're the foundation of one of the most important public spaces in the city of Los Angeles, and the cities everywhere. With a sidewalk that's fixed, that's flat, that's accessible for everybody, then you can plant some trees. Then you can have a bus stop. Then you can actually invest in your street lighting. Then you can even do broadband in your street lighting. And let's do a public bathroom while we're at it. I mean, it's the fundamental element of our city and our public spaces where we're like tragically, like we have people who are living on them. We have street vendors who are making a living on them. We have all sorts of activities happening in this important shared public space, but something that's been like absolutely neglected by everyone, I think. And so I'm hopeful, like Natalie is just crushing it. And what's interesting about Natalie too, is it took a really long time to find somebody as talented as Natalie, because the lawsuit stipulated, I think you have to be an architect and an engineer. Like, is that what it was? An architect. But like also be an ADA expert. I would say if like you're currently at UCLA and still studying, like there is a huge shortage in the field of people who can do universal design, ADA, and then people who are awesome like Natalie who can translate that into public conversations to educate elected officials. There's just a tremendous gap and missed opportunity. And like, I sat in a lot of meetings around the city's bus shelters. And I swear, if I read one more LA Times article about like, oh, when are we going to get bus shelters? When are we going to get shade? Because we've had such a broken bus shelter program for so long in the city, and it's still very broken. I've heard them say that 50% of the cost installing a bus shelter in the city of Los Angeles is fixing the sidewalk. You can't install a bus shelter unless the sidewalk is ADA compliant. So that right alone, the fact that we've ignored, so 9,000 miles of sidewalks, right? The class action lawsuit found that half were in disrepair. So we're talking 50,000 miles of public infrastructure without an inventory, without a funding plan, and really without leadership from city council. So like my hope is like all this stuff about the mega events, the Olympics, is while we might not be able to fix everything, could we have a huge paradigm shift in how we manage it, and how like this idea that sidewalks are public space and are a public asset and are public infrastructure and should be planned and treated as it, and our tax dollars should go to kind of fix them. And I think that's like my reaction to all of this. I just think it's so beautiful. And I think Candace, like your videos and your experience and sharing it, I think that we just need, I'm so glad to finally see this fundamental public space issue like bubbling up in rooms like this. So just excited to be here.
I think we're going to get to the nitty gritty of like more details of like why it's not working and like what we could do. And I just want to kind of, what the numbers that Natalie shared, and I think just the, in the 2 minutes of Candace's video, just really put into perspective just the massive backlog and like scale of the problem that needs to be fixed. And so we could spend the rest of this session, the rest of today, talking about the problems. But I'd like to kind of turn it to our panelists to just share a little bit about kind of what gives you hope from other places, what is working, or what do you think, how are you kind of continuing to advocate for this kind of where do you draw optimism? So we'll start with Candace.
So what gives me hope? All of you listening to this and taking it in, because it feels like we're ready. We're really ready now. We have these big events coming and we want to spruce up. We want to look good. We want to do something great. We want to create this legacy. That part gives me a lot of hope that you all are beginning to really listen and pay attention. And the other part is the people here on this panel, is because they are really paying attention to how it needs to work and how it's not working. You know, one of the things that got me going with this was that 4th and Main corner. I said, well, I'm just going to make a complaint. And what happened was I got letters from Natalie telling me all about it and said that, you know, she was looking into it. And then I got a letter back from her saying that, well, the Bureau of Street Services in 2019, when they resurfaced the street, was supposed to do the curb ramp, and we can't do anything with the repair program because it was supposed to be done by them. It was like, what? They're not talking to each other? So now we're talking, and that's what really gives me hope.
Thank you, Candace. One of the things that really gives me hope, so being on the inside is a difficult job in some days, right? Because I see the contrast between what we need as an Angelino. I live in CD1, and what we need as, you know, as residents and people on the streets, and what the city inside's actually trying to do. And one of the things that has made me very hopeful is to see the interest of council members, of the commissioners on the Board of Public Works, and even in the mayor's office at trying to make an impact to solve this intractable problem. You know, I do think that the games coming has been a motivating aspect to this. Just in the last 2 years, I would say the city has been able to mobilize to create a plan to inventory and assess the pedestrian facilities in the city. We started out with a pilot project to just try and first step understand what it would cost and what technology we could even use to assess these 9,000 miles of sidewalks, right? So that's happened just in the last year, and we'll be using that technology to prepare some of these pathways for for games related purposes, but that's a legacy that will live on in our neighborhoods afterwards, right? Additionally, I know that we're using the games as a motivator to create like an asset management approach to these facilities. Like Jessica said, would it be appropriate, or even, I mean, could you imagine if, 1 in 5 of us couldn't get our car out of our driveway to drive down the street? That's really what these sidewalks are for people with disabilities, right? 1 in 5 folks has a disability. Could you imagine if 1 in 5 folks couldn't get out of their house and walk down their sidewalk? And so it's hopeful to me that, folks in leadership positions are interested in understanding the issue. That timeline, sorry, folks, it wasn't prepared for you. We've already shared it with city staff, council members, and Board of Public Works. So they're interested in learning that things are really broken, that we don't have a program. But then it also seems that they're interested in hearing the reality of the experience for our residents with disabilities, that folks can't get out of their house, and that if that was an experience for someone driving their car, that they would be fixing it. So there is an interest, and it does seem like, given the games as a deadline, we are making, fundamental change. I'm just not sure it's happening fast enough. We only have 3 years to go. And so I think the next question is, how do we fix a 50-year problem in 3 years so that we can have folks come from all over the world, come from the rest of the United States, and simply get around and enjoy what the city has to offer. And I truly think that, number one, understanding what we have, and number two, looking at those small projects. So going back to the conversation that happened this morning with Dan and Salida, they were really highlighting those, not the tiniest projects, not the biggest projects, but the medium-sized projects. That's where accessibility lives, right? That's a sidewalk replacement. That's an intersection of curb ramps. It's not rearranging the streetscape and moving the curb line. That's fun. It's lovely, but it's not really necessary to give people the basics that they need to get around. So I feel like this 3-year timeline is a real sweet spot, is a real opportunity for us to put in the infrastructure that's necessary to create a lasting legacy for us, and also just get people to point A and point B for the games. So focusing on those medium-sized projects, and then backing it up with targeted maintenance techniques, right? So do we really need to remove and reconstruct a full parcel of sidewalk when we just have one section of uplift? No, let's be agile. Let's use different techniques and treatments so that as a whole, we have a well-maintained system that works, right? So that's really what gives me hope. I think we can definitely make some positive change before 2028.
What gives me hope is the level of consensus amongst just your average person, not those of you in this room, but people who never think about transportation policy, that sidewalks are important and that this is a good use of public resources and taxpayer dollars. I mean, how many of you have collected signatures for a citizen ballot measure? So it's hard, right? You're posting people with a clipboard and you want them to sign something and people run away from you and they're like, I'm not registered to vote. But when I was collecting signatures for the sidewalk initiative, all I had to say is, do you want better sidewalks? And people were like, yes, where do I sign? And it didn't even matter if they were from Denver, if they were visiting Denver from Texas or California. They were like, yes, how do I sign up for this? People understand that sidewalks are important. And when they learned that the government didn't pay for sidewalks and that it was their job as a property owner, they were like, what? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Of course I should be using my taxpayer dollars to pay for sidewalks. So I would make this case that sidewalks are sexier than you think. And if you're an elected official, this is a winning issue for you. It's an opportunity to be bold and go big. And you know what? $1 billion to build out a sidewalk network, which sounds like a lot. We just spent something like $2 to $3 billion to widen a 5-mile segment of highway in Denver. But with $1 billion, you could improve every single neighborhood in the city. So it's an opportunity to have an incredible widespread impact that's going to be appreciated by everybody in your city. So be bold.
I think what gives me hope is the City of LA Budget Committee that's currently composed. I've been so incredibly impressed with Councilmember Hernandez. She held a public works hearing before the budget hearing. So she's the chair of the Public Works Committee, which is Bureau of Street Lighting, Bureau of Street Services, Bureau of Engineering, Contract Administration, Sanitation. Everybody who works on the sidewalks. Public Works manages the sidewalks. DOT only does the roadbed, right? So she held this hearing where she brought in all the GMs, and it wasn't in a budget hearing, so it was a little more laid back, where she let the staff walk her through, and the rest of the committee, everything that's going on and wrong and big picture thing. And it's incredible. And I really see her, Councilmember Yaroslavsky, Blumenfeld's always been a really good champion, but as grumpy as I am as the past kind of absence of leadership in city council on sidewalks, I see something really changing. There is such incredible hard times with cuts that have been being made. There's also these really cool, like exciting conversations about parks going on, a ballot measure for parks, for street lights. There's this moment that I'm in a lot of rooms and talking to a lot of people where the idea of reform comes up. Reforming how the city of LA manages its public spaces and really looking at it from a comprehensive perspective, and kind of almost the opposite of how fast can we get people through a corridor, but how nice can it be to linger, and how do we get more trees, and how do we make it, and this is a long-term goal, but I think maybe Natalie was saying, but all the fear and stuff about the Olympics and what's going to happen, I think a lot of people are being like, oh my gosh, there is no plan. Like, there is no project list. There is no coordination. And I think the more people that realize that LA is the only major city without a capital infrastructure plan, we're doing things piece by piece, largely if you have access to power, not what's for the good of the city and for all neighborhoods. But and now we just got the charter reform, people sat down. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all of these incredibly hard things the city's been struggling its way through, for civic leaders to come up and fix it. And I think voters would support it. Also in a lot of rooms where people are no more new revenue for the city of LA without reform. How are we structurally changing the way projects are delivered, coordinated, and done? And for me, that's a huge opportunity to have everything in the public right of way, including the parks. I was in a session the other day for Lonnie, which holds this really cool conference here, where they're talking about, people are talking about linear parks, streets as parks, right? So one thing I learned a while ago is that the majority of the city of Los Angeles trees are on private property and in parks, right? 200,000 empty tree wells, all this stuff. But if we were really trying to make a more greener, comfortable, wonderful place to be, are we then envisioning trees as part of fixing our sidewalks, an extension of our parks, and all that good stuff? I think is such a different paradigm shift than things I've seen previously in Los Angeles. And I think there's a lot of really cool people who are coming to the table and being I love LA, things are really in trouble, what do we got to do to fix it? And I'm I'm all in, let's do it. So
yeah, I think that what Jessica's describing is there's a real opportunity window, right? We have people that are paying attention, that we have all these mega events as a way to make sure that we're having a good experience for people that are coming. But also I think that the shade, the sidewalks, these are things, if we want to think about a legacy, this is the easiest one to do, right? This is something that will make it so that people that are the Paralympians can enjoy the city, that are the visitors, but that, good sidewalk is not, it's not a temporary bus lane. I would love to see a bunch of temporary bus lanes, but we fixed the sidewalk, we fixed the sidewalk, right? So I think, just adding to Jessica's point, there's probably been more conversations around sidewalks and street trees that I've heard in the last 2 years that I've heard the previous decade. And so there's definitely some momentum. So I want to throw one question to Jill before we turn it over to Slido, because like you said, everyone loves sidewalks. There's reform. We're thinking about stuff. Once you figure out to who's how do you fix it? How do you make the line of what gets done when? I think that's when things get a little prickly. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit about the process in terms of figuring out with your voter initiative, where did you land? How did the process go in terms of figuring out how to prioritize and where to start fixing the problem in Denver?
Yeah, the city's already done that work. So they updated our pedestrian master plan in 2019, and they did very extensive community outreach and engagement. And they asked people, what are the most important places for you to walk, or the most important places for us to have safer pedestrian conditions? And they very quickly, a consensus emerged. It's our high injury network. This is the 5% of our streets where 50% of the traffic fatalities happen. These are big arterial streets that were designed like highways, but now have, our highest ridership transit routes. There's a lot of the destinations people are trying to get to, medical centers, schools, job sites. This is where all the pedestrian fatalities are happening. A lot of the streets don't have sidewalks, so that was obvious. Start there. More generally, high transit routes, high ridership transit routes was another obvious place. Everybody who takes transit is a pedestrian at some point in your trip. Even if you drive to a park and ride, when you get to your destination and you get off the bus or train, you're gonna have to walk somewhere. So focusing our sidewalk network around our transit network. And then we asked people, what are the other high priority destinations that you want to be able to walk to? And schools, parks, and grocery stores came to the top of the list. So we already have a detailed map that divides our sidewalks into 6 priority tiers. And so the ordinance just tells the city, use your own priority tiers that you already came up with when you're building out the network.
Fantastic. So I'm going to turn to Adonia, who's going to call on our first Slido question.
Nope.
Just have to wait. Just give it like 10 seconds and it'll be ready.
I pushed it up. Okay, there's the delay. Thank you, panelists, for all that wonderful information and inspiration. We're going to start with a question from Vicki Englert. Where is Vicki? Okay. Phoebe will bring the mic over.
And in the interest of trying to get through a number of questions, if there's a particular person that you would like to direct your question to, we'll see if that helps us get through more questions.
Vicki Englert, compiler, had a question, I think mostly for Natalie. I'm going to skip the engineering terms and talk about them as the single ramps, the ones that face the middle of the intersection, and then the double ramps, where you have 2. In 2020, the state passed a regulation requiring the double. And there's a 2022 memo from the Bureau of Engineering that said, this is how we're going to do things. However, they listed 11 exceptions and a 12th, which was if the engineer feels like he shouldn't, they shouldn't. It says, new projects override all of that. But as of last year, there were still plans coming out from the city for new projects, new sidewalks that still had single ramps. Where are we now? And is that on your mind in terms of like closing that loophole? Because it feels like the engineering department is still in new projects and they still repair things that they're kind of being a little too generous with the exceptions and still building brand new or doing major repairs with single crosswalk ramps.
Great, thank you. I don't know if the mic was working, so I'll repeat the question quickly. But the question was about the ramp design. So curb ramp design, the single ramp, which I call a diagonal curb ramp, which leads folks out to the middle of the street, which Candace showed us, or the directional curb ramps, where you typically have 2 curb ramps on one corner. Each crossing gets its own curb ramp so that the route for the pedestrian is directional from the sidewalk into the crossing. And the question was, the city has made commitments and documents that it was going to move towards doing directional curb ramps, a curb ramp for each crossing, but yet you're seeing that diagonal curb ramps are still being provided. So what's the deal, right? The city's, there are a couple of things. The city's standard plans reflect the priority to, you have a question or a comment? How are we closing the loophole? Yes. And that's where I'm headed. So part of my work is to inform and update the city standard plans. So that's the document that projects use to know what to build. It tells whether it's, the city doing the project, a developer doing the project, Metro doing the project. It tells them exactly what we want the infrastructure to look like out on our streets. And for at least the last 6 years, the directional curb ramps have been prioritized, but there are exceptions to that. And the exceptions are mostly technical. So part of the issue that the city has is that there is a lot of stuff out on each street corner. And so in order to take what was a diagonal curb ramp and turn it into 2 individual curb ramps, you're needing to relocate things like signal boxes and signal poles and catch basins, really expensive and complicated infrastructure to move when you're just trying to do a pedestrian project. And so I think the challenge that the city is faced with is how do we prioritize these directional ramps when we have stuff already out there. And the way that I've been doing it, the way that I'm leading the city into, is to understanding that the priorities, right? That a directional curb ramp that is slightly non-compliant with disabled access standards, because it's infeasible to get perfection is better, is more valuable as a whole than it is to put in a diagonal curb ramp that is 100% perfect. And that's the learning that the engineers and the planners and the architects and everybody doing this infrastructure has to learn, that there's a value judgment that goes beyond, 100% strict technical compliance. There's a usability aspect that holds extreme value for people out there using the infrastructure. And so we are issuing what's called a special order. It's a policy document from the city which helps people know what the priorities are. That directional curb ramps are going to be prioritized over diagonal, even when we have those infrastructure constraints on the corners. So that's what we're working towards. You may still see some projects come out with diagonal curb ramps. A lot of designs maybe were designed 4 or 5 years ago. Can be a lag sometimes, but the commitment is there. And that's what we're working towards. Yeah.
Adonia, next question.
All right. Next, we're going to hear from Joshua Shank.
Might have to hold it, right?
Oh, like that? Yeah. Sound good? All right. It's really for Natalie, but Jill, I appreciate your perspective as well. It's the question, and you alluded to it earlier, is that when we want to mobilize for an emergency because cars can't get anywhere, that happens. We have an emergency right now with sidewalks. We've had it for some time. Streets a lot of times don't even have sidewalks on main streets. We've all seen it here in Los Angeles. That's completely out of control. Why can't we get that same level of emergency and urgency for the sidewalks, especially with the games coming up? But even if the games weren't coming up, why can't we mobilize and develop that here in Los Angeles? What's the problem?
I think that it's a lack of perspective. So if everyone in this room, if everyone on city council, if everyone in the Board of Public Works had a disability, it would be the highest priority for the work that we're doing as a city. But our perspective is not that. We don't live this day to day. And so we walk out the door and we go to work and we work on the 100 other emergencies that are facing us. And we forget this one because it's not our daily experience. And so to make it an emergency and to make that emergency hold, we really need to encourage folks with lived experience, with disability, to bring their voices to the table. If you're working on projects for the city, if you're a planner or an engineer or an architect, ask yourself, who on my team has that perspective? Do you have somebody who has disability access knowledge? And if you don't, then you may be part of the issue, because it seems easy to do accessibility, right? None of us want to discriminate. But at the end of the day, these projects do come out and they're not accessible. They're not moving the needle. And so we have to maintain that perspective every single day through every single decision we make if we're going to keep that urgency and use it to create change in time for the games and afterwards.
Right after.
Sure.
The emergency is not only for people with disabilities. The
Of
urgency
course.
is for anyone who does not have access to vehicles or anyone who actually ever wants to use the transit system. Like, it's
Right.
the entire city.
It's everyone needs the infrastructure, but I think if you had a disability, the emergency would ring true. It would feel like an emergency because you would know that you couldn't get out your door. I think because most of us can step over that uplifted sidewalk, it takes a little longer to get to the bus stop, but we can get to the bus stop for the most part. That's what I think. It's to take it from that perspective, or even just the perspective of someone who relies on transit to get to work. It's not an option to take a car, right? And so the importance of those facilities is greater.
I just want to add, co-sign everything Natalie said, but the structural issues, the way the city of Los Angeles is set up and governed, is a huge problem. There is no director of infrastructure. Every single project that comes up from the city is usually a go-getter staffer, a really awesome city council staffer. There's no understanding of the scale and condition of the public assets. and not even any sort of understanding of the cost. And when you watch the budget hearings, it's like whack-a-mole. They're just doing one thing, and I think there's just a real lack of understanding among the policymakers of just how enormous this problem is. And there's no, like, Department of City Planning in Los Angeles has nothing to do with the public right of way. Nobody's planning this. Nobody's doing the work. Nobody's presenting their reports. It kind of literally falls through the cracks. So that's why I think, like, structurally, the way the city is managing its infrastructure dollars, there's no chance for a powerful, influential person, Councilmember Hernandez seems to be trying to do this, to be like, oh, holy cow, like, this is 9,000 miles we're talking about without a plan. Like, and this has cascading effects on our ability to do shelters and trees and streetlights, et cetera. Like, it's just, that's why I think we really need a director of capital planning in the city of Los Angeles for all of the public spaces. Because right now it's everybody for themselves doing their own good work, but completely piecemealed, siloed, and politically driven too.
And I mean, I think that the transportation sector as a whole has just neglected the issue from property line to property line for its entire existence. Like, you look at what things get done because you require traffic counts, because you require reporting transit stuff. There is no federal or state requirement about sidewalks in terms of just knowing what you have. And so, to use the adage, like, what gets counted counts, like, this has been a big problem the transportation sector as a whole has created. And now we have to kind of get the political movement and the political will to overcome the structural issues. So let's just get off my soapbox now. Adonia, can we get the last question?
Another one?
Here?
Okay, so we're going to go to Jacqueline Mullen.
Well, to follow up on that, my question is about what happened in Denver then in terms of the political will. Is there a way of getting more of a coalition so that the accessibility, yes, is kind of on the front burner, but also supported by, an economic argument about foot traffic to local businesses and a health argument? In 2020, we were all walking as much as we could. And so getting people behind that, like, remember when we were all out walking and how that was good for us? And also the, injury avoidance for the accessibility issues, but also just for the average everyday citizen that trips on, an impassable sidewalk. So was there anything that got that political will, some sort of coalition that helped in Denver?
Yes, absolutely. The Denver Streets Partnership itself actually got started as an informal coalition of walk, bike, and transit advocates. And we were all fighting for scraps in the city's annual budget of pitting money for sidewalks against money for bike lanes, against money for bus lanes. And so we came together as a coalition to say, we need money for better transportation. And that means this. And that was so effective in terms of starting to move the needle that we started growing our coalition to include other organizations that care about transportation because it intersects with their priorities, whether it's air quality, or we have a lot of business improvement districts who really care about the financial, like, they're very in touch with the small businesses, as opposed to typically when you talk about the business community, you're talking about like Microsoft or something, but it's the small businesses who depend on that foot traffic. And so business improvement districts are a big part of our coalition. Access for people with disability, we have disability rights advocates, social justice groups who care about the inequities that are caused. And so it was very much a coalition effort. And as you saw, there were 50 some organizations that ended up endorsing, and no organization that came out and said they opposed it. There were some that chose not to take a position, like the Apartment Managers Association decided it was a wash and didn't take a position. But I would also say, in answer to the previous question of what the problem is, like, at the end of the day, it is a cultural problem. It's car brain. There's been research that, like, car culture is so deeply embedded in our culture here in the US that we're willing to accept all these harms unquestioningly that we wouldn't accept from other things. If you just replace the word car with something else, people's opinion changes. And I think the emergency are the traffic fatalities. They are off the charts. There are more than 40,000 people killed in traffic fatalities every year. And we're like, yeah, that's business as usual. It's fine because I can drive to where I need to go and it's worthwhile. But imagine if it was like, we had bad batches of lettuce that caused 40,000 people to die from food poisoning. Like, we would declare that's a national emergency and we need to do something about it. And I think that's where a lot of the culture change is coming from, is people are not willing to continue to let their neighbors and their children and their friends die on our city streets because we haven't provided adequate infrastructure. And that's where the culture change is coming from, I think, in Denver and across the country.
Well, before we go ahead and thank our panel and head to break, I just want to thank everyone for their great questions and attention on sidewalks. I think Jill's point about kind of, just the status quo of our transportation system, it's really important that like universal access means things are better for everyone. I do want to kind of come back to Candace's presentation at the beginning. It's just also remember, like, while it's the needs for everyone, like these are really extremely heightened issues for people with disabilities. We want to make sure that those are at the forefront because it is life or death if you can't get out of your house, if you have to be isolated, if you can't get to your doctor. So hopefully we both have a short term, we need to fix this now, and a long term, we need to keep going. There's a lot of great questions in the Slido, so we'll kind of continue the conversation. Please join me in thanking our panel, and we'll return in 15 minutes.